Hi everybody, welcome to day number 3 of our devotional series based on the book A Time to Dance, Chasing Joy in Difficult Seasons. I'm excited about day number 3 because we're talking about chapter number 3, which is all about hearing God's voice, trusting God's voice, and growing in that trust so that we can really allow his voice to pour into us completely unfiltered and let him heal us, let him guide us, let him direct us, and let him just pour into us every single day. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I apologize because I feel like this video is inevitably going to be a little longer than some of the other videos because there's just so much meat when it comes to this topic and this chapter. But I'll try to make kind of a condensed version and not go down too many little rabbit holes. But I wanted to start off with a little story, and I'll try to make it very, very fast. But what's neat is that every time I journey through one of these devotional series, I am pushed way out of my comfort zone. But God always shows up in these really, really cool ways. And when I'm doing the devotional series through a written format, I don't always get to share those stories with you guys. But since I'm doing a video, I thought, gosh, I just want to share these stories as they happen. So long story short, I tried to film this video a couple of days ago and it just wasn't coming together. And when I sit down to write or do a video, if I am not in that space where I feel the Holy Spirit pouring through whatever I'm writing or speaking, I literally am like a dying engine that's just sitting there going kerplunk, kerplunk, kerplunk until I eventually give out. I just give up and I walk away. And I know every time I experience that it's time to release the reins and say back to God, okay, apparently I'm trying to do this in my timing and in my own way because I had this upcoming trip. I'm actually sitting at a hotel room right now. I had this upcoming trip where I was traveling for a long distance over several states, and I wanted to have all these videos done ahead of time so that I wasn't stressed about them on my trip. And I was trying to force the video to happen, and it just wasn't working. So here I am in the hotel room. I've got wet hair and no makeup on. It's real life. It's messy, right? Here's my hotel room coffee. And I'm sitting here going, okay, God, you led me to this point. It wasn't flowing then. There's got to be a reason for it. And suddenly I realize, and I could tell you the full backstory, but I'm trying to make it a condensed version, but it comes to my attention that I am literally right now sitting in the hotel room that I first heard God's voice for the very first time in my life, which was about, I guess it'd be a little over 2 years ago, when I heard God's voice for the first time. Maybe it was about 2.5 years ago, for the first time in my life. Anyways, my point is, it's incredible how God works, because today we're talking about chapter number 3, which is all about hearing God's voice and trusting God's voice. And at the time in my life where I laid my head in this hotel room and he literally shook me awake with his voice, I had no relationship at all with God. And he has taught me all along the way how to not only hear his voice, but how to remove the filters that I had in place that kept me from allowing his voice to pour in, to allow him to heal me. And now I'm in this place where I love when he enters my space, and even the slightest nudge from him, I not only sense and am sensitive to, but I try to lean into it every opportunity I can, because my experience with him in the last 2 years has taught me that I can trust who he is and where he's taking me. So all of that is just to say this, to be sitting in this hotel room, in the very same hotel where I heard God's voice for the very first time, and to be talking to you about God's voice and hearing God's voice and trusting God's voice, to me is such a powerful, powerful thing. No matter where you're sitting on the other side of this video, know right now that God loves you. God is pouring into you. God is speaking into your heart and in your life every single day. And he desires for you to draw close to him and bring your authentic self, like we talked about, and begin to develop that deeply personal relationship with him. And that's really what I want to dive into right off the bat in this video. And that is this. You'll hear me talk a lot in this series about relationship versus religion. And I think that many of us have been given the message that when we're not hearing God, when we're not experiencing something, when something's not going right, that we just don't have enough faith. We're not faithful enough. We're not walking the right path. We're not doing it right. There is something we are failing at on our end. And that faith it into fruition aspect, I want you to take that for as long as this video goes. And I want you to put it in a little box, and I want you to set it to the side, because I have something totally different to suggest. And that is this. Faith is a beautiful and natural byproduct that comes from growing in our relationship with God. It's not something we have to force into fruition so that we get the blessing. Not at all. God's grace is sufficient. He loves us no matter what path we've walked, no matter what road we've taken, no matter what choices we've made. So you don't have to faith anything into fruition. You don't have to tell yourself, well, I'm just failing at having enough faith. No, what I am encouraging you to do, no matter where you are in your journey, is just come to God and say, teach me how to grow in my relationship with you. Teach me how to hear your voice and remove the filters that are in my life that keep me from fully experiencing the outpouring of your love and your grace and your incredible faithfulness, and because God is pouring that into you every single day. But see, over time we develop filters, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But what I'm trying to say is this: as we invite God into that space, God, please come into my life, help me build a relationship with you. As we invite him into that space, we are going to begin to experience God in new and powerful ways. We are going to be experiencing his faithfulness that he's always been pouring over us, his goodness that he's always been pouring into us, his love that he's always been pouring into us. As we invite him into that space, we're going to start experiencing something he's always been pouring, but we've been kind of filtering some of it out. We're going to start experiencing that in new and powerful ways. And as we experience that and supernatural things begin to happen in our lives, we are going to start trusting that that is God, that we can trust him, that we can lean into that. And as we begin to experience that, the faith grows naturally from that. So God teaches us who he is, how much he loves us, and how we can trust him. And then that faith begins to grow naturally from that experience and that relationship with a very real Father that loves you very much. So I'm going to back up that conversation for just a second and go back to the very beginning of chapter 3, which is all about Peter. And we talk about Peter and he's standing in this boat, or I don't know, bracing himself in this boat, because you've got huge waves in this major storm. And one of the very first questions of chapter 3 is, what would it take for Peter to step out of that boat when Jesus says, come to me on the water? And if you place that in your own life, whatever storm you're facing, whatever you're going through, what would it take to fully fall in, to fully lean into who Jesus is and trust him wholeheartedly, even when what he's calling you into is scary, even when what he's calling you into is uncomfortable? Because walking out on that water in the middle of a storm was scary and uncomfortable. And there's going to be things in our lives that we're going through, storms that we're going through, and God is calling us to follow him. And whatever he's calling us into may feel scary and it may feel uncomfortable. What is it going to take for you to step into that trust? And I'm going to tell you right now that I don't believe that Peter was standing on that boat saying, well, I've heard about Jesus. I know who Jesus is. I've heard about him. I've heard he does miracles. I've heard he's a good father. I've heard. Nobody can talk you into faithing it into fruition. Peter wasn't standing on that boat saying, I just got to faith it enough. No, you know what I'm going to suggest was the moment that he decided to step his foot over the railing. And that is when he recognized, I have a personal relationship with Jesus. I know who he is. I know him. I know his goodness. I know his faithfulness. I've watched him heal the sick. I have watched him feed the hungry. I know who he is. I know this man. I don't just know who he is. I know him. I have a personal relationship with him. And that personal relationship has shown me how good and faithful of a father he is. And because I know that, the faith has grown naturally where I know I can step out of this boat, I can step out of my storm, and Jesus is going to catch me. He's going to catch me. He's going to provide. And that's what he's promising you today, that if you grow in your relationship with him and allow that faith to grow naturally, that when you begin to feel like I'm ready to step out and step towards you in my unknown, in my uncomfortable, that he's going to provide, and you are going to be able to walk on that water. And sure, there was that moment where in the middle of Jesus providing and Peter walking on that water, Peter looked up at his circumstances, just like we do so many times at the storm swirling around us, and go, oh, can I really trust him? And we begin to sink because we're thinking, oh, I just don't know. Maybe I should take back the reins. But in that moment, Jesus scooped him up and he took care of him. So I'm just encouraging you today that it is in that relationship with Jesus where we can begin to step out of that boat. And that relationship starts with just curling up at his feet and saying, God, show me who you are. And that is my number 2 point, is that God is the best teacher. We all experience God. We experience his voice. We experience his presence in completely different ways. The most powerful thing to me, God, when he came into my life in this very hotel room, when he came into my life and began to pour into me and speak into me, I had no relationship at all with him. And when he began to do that, he showed me who he was in a way that's completely different than the way he comes to my husband. He comes to my husband in a completely different way than he comes to my earthly daddy, my earthly mom. We all experience God in a completely different way. So don't place that filter in your life that says, I'm not experiencing God, or God doesn't speak to me because I don't experience him the same way as someone else. No, lay that question at his feet. Lay that. I have had friends who it's really, really cool to experience, because they have come to me and said, I'm not even sure if I believe in God. He doesn't speak to me. And I just encourage their hearts, just like I'm encouraging you today. Lay that question at his feet and say, God, I want to experience you. I want to know you're real. And then these very same friends, we have lunch and we're sitting there talking about the powerful God moments that they're having in their lives. And it's just incredible because God is the best teacher. And at the same time, their God moments are completely different than my God moments, because he comes to them and speaks to them in his own and their own individual language and individual way. So don't place that filter that just because I experience God in one way, or your friend experiences God in one way, just lay it at his feet and say, hey, God, show me how you want to speak to me. And then the third thing I want to say is keep the enemy out of that conversation, because the enemy is going to tell you you're not important enough. You've walked the wrong path. God doesn't care about you. God gave up on you. God doesn't talk to you. You are not big enough to be special enough in God's eyes that he cares to pour into you. And I just want to let you know, the enemy wants nothing better to hold you in that place where he wraps up your identity in nothing but shame, which is what we're going to talk about in chapter 4. He wraps up your identity in nothing but shame, and you feel this big and you feel like you're not important and special to God, because the truth is the enemy knows that when you start growing in your relationship with God and you start experiencing God's goodness and God's faithfulness and having this incredible, supernatural, indescribable relationship with God, you are going to grow into your calling. You are going to grow into your path where God is taking you, his vision for you. And suddenly the enemy's campground is going to start shaking. His ground is going to start shaking, and he wants nothing more than to keep you in this place where you feel this big, so that God can't pour into you how incredible you really are. So don't let the enemy do that at all. There are lots of other really neat filters that we talk about in chapter 3 that you can go through and truly look at when it comes to making sure that you're removing the filters out of your life that may be preventing you from the full outpouring of God. Understand, God is always talking to you. There's never a moment where you've walked too far or strayed too far that God isn't speaking to you. He's always speaking to you. It's removing those filters where we are not allowing his full outpouring to pour over us. And so that's what I'm encouraging you to do today, to lay that at his feet. I am going to take my hotel room coffee and I'm going to skedaddle on the rest of my drive, but I am so excited that you joined me today. I apologize this video was a little longer. There's just so much meat when it comes to hearing God's voice. I hope this video has helped you if you feel like you're in this place where God doesn't speak to you. I highly encourage you to journal every time you feel God pouring into you. Real quick last note. When my husband first started truly experiencing God speaking to him, Every time he would come home and tell me that he felt God's nudge and he did this or he said this to someone in his life, I journaled. I would jot it down, jot it down, jot it down. And then months later or even a year later, that person would come back to him with this incredible, powerful story that all began with that little seed where God gave my husband a little nudge and my husband said something to them, or my husband did something or gave them a gift. And that little seed grew and blossomed into something that God grew in them, and it changed their whole lives. And that's so powerful when you journal, because you can go back to those moments and look at them and go, wow, God, wow. So I just encourage you in your journal today to not only kind of work through what are the filters that I have placed in my life, in my mind, in my heart, where I'm not allowing the full outpouring of God when he's speaking to me, but also journal. Just journal every time you feel God pouring into you. And I'm going to leave on that because I know this video is a little long, but gosh, bless you guys today. I hope you have a day that's just filled. Sorry, my accent came out there for a moment. I hope your day is filled with God moments where he just pours into you and you just feel his presence in every moment of the day. Have a beautiful and wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow in chapter 4, where we are going to break free from the enemy's bindings of shame. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.